All right, how is everyone? Good. I know I have the slot right after lunch when all of your blood rushes from your head to your stomach to digest the food that you just had. So we'll try to kind of keep it somewhat interactive and keep it going. And if you feel yourself getting very drowsy, there's some exercise equipment over here, some balls there that you can sit on, some gymnastic balls, and I will not be offended if you need to get up and get around and do whatever you need to do to get your head moving. So, all right, like I just said, this session is pretty straightforward in terms of what it's about. It's VCIO, what is it, and do I actually need it? Before we jump in, I'm going to talk a little bit about who I am and kind of why I chose to present about this topic. My contact information is up here if you want to connect with me. I love talking about this stuff, so feel free to hit me up in any way you'd like. But yeah, so first off, next week is going to be my 14th anniversary with Nex-Tech. I started out of college, honestly, with Nex-Tech with an English degree and nothing at all with IT. And it's been kind of an accidental love affair because I absolutely love working in the IT space. There's always something new. It's always fascinating. It's always cool. So been doing this for close to 14 years now. I'm a sales supervisor. So my job is to set our good people like Neva and Sean up for success so they can solve your problems and set you up for success. One of my favorite things about my job, apart from, of course, presenting to all of you today, is actually we're part of a peer group, of a IT Nation peer group of like-minded people. Those are technology providers, managed service providers throughout the nation, and actually also over in Europe. And Nex-Tech's been involved with them for close to 20 years, I think. I've been involved with it for about 8 years, and it's really cool because every quarter I get to go and meet with those people and see technology providers from everywhere, and we literally just talk shop for 2 days. And we just talk about what's coming in the industry, what's cool and exciting, how are people doing what they're doing, how can we do right by our customers? Because at the end of the day, I think we're all kind of in this together. Really, we're just trying to do whatever we can to help you guys make sense of your IT and maybe make a living on the side, right? So I really love doing that. And what it's given me is an ability to see all kinds of companies and kind of get an idea of what everybody else is doing there. So I'm curious, who do we all have in the room? Are you guys, who here deals directly with IT day to day? Okay, quite a few. Awesome. The ones that haven't raised their hands, what's your guys' roles? Oh, perfect. This is going to be you. You're going to be my special project. Fantastic. And I don't think you had your hand raised? You did? Did you have your hand raised? Okay, perfect. All right. Anybody else I missed? Everybody else kind of in IT? All right. Are you guys doing stuff like day-to-day tactical or more long-term decisions around IT? A little bit of both? A little bit of both. All right. I'm curious, what prompted you to be in this session?
What is it?
What is it? All right, tell me a little bit more about that.
I'm not familiar with what the VCIO stands for or what it is.
Okay, so just learning, what is that term? I'm assuming you've come across the term somewhere? No, not really? Okay. Okay, what else?
The detail on the apps that geared toward anyone in a regulated industry.
Yeah. Yeah. Healthcare? Yep. Perfect. Fantastic. Awesome. Anybody else have anything specific they wanted to get out of today? Knowledge would be good. I hope so. I hope so. Yes. Yes. Okay. Fantastic. Does anybody feel like they have somewhat of an idea of what a virtual chief information officer, which is what it stands for? Anybody get a clue like what they think it is, and anybody feel like they're doing some of that today, or not sure?
Me doing my boss's job.
I love that. Awesome. Okay, perfect. So we're going to have some fun. No, this is great. I love it. All right, so let's kind of jump in and talk a little bit about. Oh, I lost it. That's all right. There we go. All right, this is my corporate slide for you guys, and this is also a great example of how AI still falls a little bit short, because you can see I asked it to create a graphic with all the buzzwords in the industry, and I put them all in. And yeah, this is supposed to be digital transformation and SaaS and virtualization and cloud and automation and AI. So VCIO to me is kind of like the buzzword in the industry right now. Like a lot of these other words have been and have been for a while. And it's kind of like a lot of these other buzzwords where everyone's kind of heard about it. Everybody thinks everyone else knows what it is. No one really knows what the deliverables are and the specifics are around it. But because you think everybody else does, nobody asks any questions, right? So I looked at kind of all of my notes of peer group meetings with other MSPs from the last 7 years, and the first one, 8 years. The first one was actually, I just told it to search for VCIO. And I found that the first time it showed up was my very first meeting in Dallas in 2017. And some of them asking about, what are you doing? Are you doing this? We want to deliver this to our clients. We're not sure how. And I look through, and almost every year it pops up. So this has been a thing that we've been talking about. And so hopefully we can provide a little bit of clarity around it today. So what do you do today when you don't know what something is? You ask AI, what is this? So I typed in AI, what is a VCIO? Virtual Chief Information Officer. And actually Copilot and ChatGPT were pretty similar on what they said. I was actually surprised how similar they were. And if you do a little bit of research online, it all pops up the same thing. So the key around a virtual Chief Information Officer is exactly like many of you pointed out. Virtual means it's some sort of third party or outsourced resource. This is in contrast to any organizations that have an, in-house Chief Information Officer. And if you look at the key responsibilities, some of them might look like the ones that your boss might have on their job description. It's all around kind of strategic IT development is what I would call it. So you got IT strategy development that's very similar to technology strategy, technology road mapping, so your roadmap for what you're going to need to deploy, your upgrades, yada, yada, yada. You kind of have a similar thing here, technology assessment, evolving your current applications, hardware, infrastructure, cybersecurity oversight, vendor management, right? All these different people we work with, same here. There's budget planning in there, budget and IT planning, and then compliance and risk management, which ChatGPT kind of hit on as well. So those are kind of the general things. And then I looked at what are the notes that we've been talking about in the industry. And they're actually pretty similar of what the MSP said, that the services they deliver as VCIO services. Technology road mapping, budgeting and planning for your IT infrastructure, third-party vendor assistance, cybersecurity, because come on, we're the pros, right? We know it all. We're like your knight in shining armor. We can solve all your cybersecurity woes. And then they have some stuff that I put in quotation marks because I just love how fluffy and vague they are. IT consulting, which could literally be anything and everything, right? If I tell you to buy, what's that?
Turn it off, turn it back on.
Yeah, turn it off, turn it on again, yes. Or I think you should buy a Lenovo versus an HP, right? Like you could consider that consulting, I guess. And then adding strategic value to our clients. I love that one because it's like, what the heck are you actually doing? So, but it kind of, most of it aligns with what AI told us. So I was like, all right, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Where is the gap, and is there a gap? So I thought, let's start digging into some of those and break down what they actually mean. If you hire a VCIO, what are the actual services they should be delivering to you? So let's start with the low-hanging fruit and use cybersecurity, because that's a very, very specific one, right? If you hire a VCIO and ask them to help you with your cybersecurity, the kind of broad framework would be they help you with your tools, so the technology, the apps, your applications that you're using, the software you're using, et cetera, with your people, training your people. That could be your security awareness training. That could be any other kind of process you have set up for that. And then your processes, so those would be your HR policies of what happens when you're not doing your cybersecurity awareness training. And kind of one of the best practices could be aligning your organization to some sort of framework or standards, such as the NIST. I'm assuming all of you guys have heard of NIST and are more or less familiar with it. Okay, so again, all right, we're getting closer to being specific. So this is the NIST framework, essentially. And if you look at it, I see people go, ah, yes. Yeah, there's a lot to it, isn't there? There's a lot to it. So there's all these different sections, and this is literally just off of the CISA website. It's a 30-plus page guide. The suck-down version for small businesses is still, I think, 18 pages. So it's pretty in-depth, right? So if you start looking at that, it has multiple domains here, right? And you're working through your tools, but it also has things like making sure all your HR policies are documented, making sure your people have actually acknowledged your HR policies, right? All of these things. And all of these have stuff to it that is going to be tied to some sort of annual goal, right? Probably your first annual goal would be to get you to some sort of standard and kind of assess where you're at, and then doing incremental improvements that are probably going to be broken down in quarterly goals, in some sort of monthly cadence, and then daily tasks, which would be, for example, your identity management and authentication, right? That comes down to a lot of the stuff that you guys are probably doing on a daily basis, looking through logs, yada, 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 dealing with incident reports and all that kind of stuff. But working through all of this, that's usually probably takes any organization like a good part of a year or multi-year process to get you to that point, right? It might be a year to get to the level where you're okay and you have a decent standard, and then it's going to be an annual thing to actually improve that on a regular basis. That is a lot more strategic, a lot more in-depth, and a lot more long-term than a lot of times what we end up doing. Because especially, I can tell you from experience, when we start talking to our customers and organizations of any kind of size, we start talking about strategic IT. What do we end up doing? We start talking about the EDR, and we start talking about the SIM, and we start talking about security awareness training, and we look at incident reports, right? And we talk about service levels in general. And all of those are really important things, because those are all the tactical things that will make up your IT strategy, but that is different from a VCIO. The true VCIO role would be all of this and then rolling that up into some sort of cadence that looks at cybersecurity, which is this piece, but then also this aspect of road mapping, and then this aspect of budgeting and planning, and all of these individual buckets, if you want to call them that, kind of have all these other things laying underneath. That is what we actually talk about when we talk about a VCIO. It's a much, much more strategic role that essentially, if you think about it, you know, you're juggling all these different balls. That's your juggler. That's making sure that all these balls are in the air, and there are a lot of times have resources to execute a lot of them, right? There definitely is some commitment where they have to do some execution, but they're usually teams that are doing the log management and doing the day-to-day IT stuff. And the VCIO kind of sits there and makes sure that all these balls are in the air. It's essentially the difference of working on the IT rather working in the IT. And if we truly look at that, it's a different conversation from then on of how you're approaching your IT. So when we go back to the definitions that we had from AI, there was one thing that was really important here that we a lot of times glance over, especially when we look at outsourcing this. So this is an advisor consultant that aligns IT with your business goals. So if you look here and you look at the individual roles and responsibilities, the IT strategy that you come up with needs to be aligned to the long-term company goals. And 3 years is a little bit like the random number I put up there, but it's just to illustrate that this is supposed to be long-term. This is not looking at next year's budget. This is looking at next year and the year after that and the year after that, right? And then aligning it to your business goals. So if your business says, we want to grow 15%, I'm sure that management has some sort of markers in there and KPIs on how we're going to get to that 15%. Whether it's a new market, whether it's hiring people that are creating revenue in the organization, whether it's expanding services, new products. And then that IT strategy needs to be tied to that, right? Of, okay, so if we're going to grow 15%, what does that mean? And what does that mean for our systems, our infrastructure, you know, whatever else it might be. Same with your IT budget. It needs to be aligned to your actual company financials. So a lot of times when you try to outsource this, how many of you have invited any sort of outsource consultant to your budget meetings and shared your company's financial performance with them? Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. But if you ask that question, my guess is most of them don't. And from my experience, we don't sit at that table, right? And the same with cybersecurity. It's not just about implementing the tools. It's then about going one step further and aligning it to some sort of best practice. It doesn't have to be the NIST. It's just one example. Same with compliance and risk management. It needs to be tied to your industry, and whoever you're hiring needs to understand what your industry is. So if it's healthcare, whoever you're hiring needs to have experience in healthcare. If it's financial, whoever you're hiring has to have experience in financial, right? Vendor management. If you're hiring any sort of service or vendor, or whatever you want to call it, managed service provider to help you with some sort of software that you're dealing with, true VCIO would mean that they actually have access to your key contacts, vendor contacts, et cetera. So a VCIO would actually have a regular seat at the executive table. And that is a very, very, very different engagement than hiring outsourced IT or hiring IT services or anything like that, or for that matter, bringing IT services in-house, right? So when you're looking at that, you're using different criteria than you would for a service provider. So for a service provider, or even if you're looking to bring internal IT on, you'd be kind of looking at, you know, kind of what Dan was just talking about, the core competencies, right? Versus if you're hiring for a VCIO role, it would be, it's a different expectation on both sides. It's much more about their expertise, not maybe necessarily just in IT, but what is their business acumen? What is their ability to lead through change management? A lot of those things, right? What is their actual industry expertise in terms of knowing what's happening on a bigger scale? Like some of the things that Kyle was talking about, right? And then making sure that they align with your values and that there's a trust relationship, because without that, you never get to the transparency that you actually need to have. So if you're considering if any of the people that you guys are working with, internally or externally, are doing some sort of VCIO stuff for you, the first and easiest things to ask yourself is, how honest are you with them, right? How transparent are you with them, and what are you willing to share with them? Because the more limited that is, the more limited their advice can be to you. So very different engagement level, and very different engagement level from you guys to whoever you're trying to hire. Because you're still going to have to put in a lot of resources, a lot of kind of energy around managing that relationship than if you just ask someone to take care of your hundreds, right? So here's what you need if you actually are interested in engaging in some sort of VCIO engagement. And this is specifically for a VCIO, so a virtual outsourced one, but I think it applies internally as well. So first of all, you got to define the success, right? what does good look like, and how do we know that we've achieved it? And again, I put 3 years on there because it is usually a much more long-term engagement. Why are we doing this, right? Be very clear about that. And I'll kind of get to that here in a minute. The reason for that is because VCIOs rarely, they can, but rarely they increase productivity or revenue. Most of the time they minimize risk, which is why they're so valuable for regulated industries usually. So if you want to make a business case, you have to have really good clarity of why you're hiring that person. And then how do we know that we actually achieve that success? How are you going to mutually measure that? The responsibilities and limitations of who owns what. And that is, I think, the most important when you're actually outsourcing anything, having good understanding of what are they going to do and where does their responsibility ends. HR is a perfect example of that. And Kyle was speaking to that at the end of his keynote this morning around culture, right? And a culture of safety, but also a culture of trust. Because I, as a VCIO, can create all the frameworks I want for you. I can require you to do security awareness training. I can require you to put all the policies in place. But if you guys don't have a mechanism internally to incentivize that or to penalize it if you have to, I'm a tiger without teeth, right? Like there's nothing I can do. So it does require mutual agreement of where does my responsibility end and where does your responsibility start and what are you going to do from that. You do need to set some sort of cadence for the goals and projects that you're trying to work on, because a lot of times what I see is people hire a VCIO and then a year down the road they're like, what have we done? Oh, I'm not sure. We've reviewed some stuff, right? So again, having a cadence, no different. You guys are all techs. You live by cadence. You live by logging your time and logging what you're doing, right? This should be no different. Annual, what's your annual goal? Quarterly, and then monthly, what's the continuous communication? And then budget. You better be willing to pay for this, because these are not like your typical managed service type of services. VCIO usually on average costs about $3 to $5K. I adjusted for our area here, monthly on top of any other outsourced services. So I'm curious, what would you throw? What do you think it costs? Because remember, this is a VCIO, right? Chief Information Officer. What do you think it usually costs you to hire any kind of C-suite role?
6 figures.
6 figures, yeah? Yeah. Yeah.
You talking about in-house or consultant?
Yeah, I'm talking about in-house if you hired someone in-house.
Yeah, I bet almost $250,000.
Could be, yep. But I think we can all agree you're not going to get off the hook for anything less than 6 figures, right? So if you think about that, if you do virtual CIO, obviously one of the benefits is that you usually have a lot lower costs in that, but you still have to count for probably a third to 2/3 of that, right? So again, that brings you very quickly to that $3 to $5K a month. What I've also seen is people hiring it on a either hourly basis. I'm always a little bit worried because it reminds me of other industries where people just, as soon as you pick up the phone, the clock's ticking. But that's your consultancy. But I've also seen it happen on like a project basis where you're scoping a set project. For example, you want to improve your cybersecurity controls and your framework and align it to your policies. That's a really easy example that can be done on a project basis.
I have a question.
Yeah.
In regards to that. So the whole purpose of this VCIO position, are you looking at it from more in a company inquiring or bringing in that position, or are you looking at it as a service provider providing that service?
Yeah, so that's a really excellent question, which leads us perfectly to, do I actually need this, right?
Well, that's what your next screen's going.
Yeah, look, it's almost like we're so in sync. I didn't pay him to be in here. So I think there's different models out there, and I think it truly depends on what your organization needs.
Okay, yeah, because I think a conflict of interest would be in there if you were
Potentially.
if you were trying to, be that and then also provide product.
Yeah, so could be, potentially. And to your point, there's a lot of kind of opinions on that. So in-house, what I've seen is either if the organization is large enough and there's enough kind of risks to warrant it in-house, you can do that. I've also seen it being split out in-house amongst multiple roles. But you might maybe have one with kind of the title, but multiple hats are owning some of it. And I've seen also a mix of some people are doing it in-house, but then are outsourcing certain parts. And then I've also seen kind of concerns around if you have a managed service provider that's providing you product and monitoring, all that kind of stuff, is there a conflict of interest if they're also doing the cybersecurity framework and controls? Potentially. My counter argument to that would be that if they are both doing it, they can go beautifully hand in hand. And because whatever frameworks you're developing, you can directly tie to operational tactics that you're doing, and you can provide the reports. But it all comes back to your level of trust, but then also to their own maturity level, right?
I like what I'm hearing. That's the reason I came here, guys. I didn't know what this was either. I was like,
I didn't either.
I was like, okay.
I work for
I mean, I know, I've heard a lot of AI, I heard all this. I wanted to learn something new. So what I'm saying, and I'm just opening this up just a little bit.
Yeah,
but
let's go for it.
What I'm saying is, I work where I work. Our risk controls IT. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, because you're in a very regulated industry.
Yeah, we're highly regulated.
Yep.
We're financial.
Yep.
There's also segregation of duties, so it winds
Yep.
up with your circle of
Yep. Yep.
Of task. And,
Yep.
and so, even though I may be a firewall guy, I'm not assigned to firewalls because I'm maybe a VM guy,
Gotcha.
and a cybersecurity guy.
Yep.
But they don't allow you to do all three.
Right, you're building in some walls,
So that's where
right?
the circle
Yeah.
is. I'm just
Yeah.
trying to.
Absolutely,
figure
and
that
I
out,
think-
guys, I'm sorry.
No, this is a really great conversation. So I think you can apply the same logic to this, right? Like you can have someone who kind of theoretically oversees it, but is not executing on these, and you can divide that up. And let's say you were looking at hiring someone, you can certainly outsource someone different to your strategic bit than the tactical bit, but you also could look at if you have a company, and that comes back to the maturity level of the provider you're engaging. And I'm just going to use as an example, if you hired someone to do the VCIO bit, you could very much put kind of walls between that. That's not the same person overseeing your SIM, right? You could do that, and I'm purely talking theoretical here, but I love the fact that you're thinking about that, because that's the whole logic behind it, is minimizing risk.
Back and try to understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. Ultimately, I think it's competing values, right? Because there's clearly some efficiencies if you have the same people doing it. But if the value is higher in terms of you're really, really trying to be mindful of your risk, you might be better off separating that. Which is the same reason of why, for the longest time, we've been very careful of doing like penetration and vulnerability tests on our own customers, because to your point, there might be a conflict of interest.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ensure that being virtual confidentiality?
You can do that via NDAs, BAAs, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, yeah. So these are some of the things to think about if this is a worthwhile role for you. To me, the biggest one is really whether it's a regulated industry or not, because again, that helps you build that business case of if you have a high risk, if some of the stuff isn't properly cared for, then you have a better business case to actually pay for those services, right? So can you afford to be down, right? Are you providing vital services, or are you facing large fines when some of this isn't in place? So those are some good things to think about. Some of the other ones are purely size and complexity of your IT. Obviously, the more complex, the more strategic you need to be about it and how you manage it. Just a quick detour on outsourcing. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but what I would like to kind of plant a seed on, when you outsource, a few things to think about. First of all, be really honest with yourself of what do you like doing? What are you good at doing? And then the biggest one is, what do you actually have resources for? Most people are not realistic about what resources they have available, because even if you outsource, you're still going to have resources that will, manage that outsourced relationship. And along with that, treat it like you're dating in your 30s, not in your 20s, right? Look for marriage material. Be clear about your intentions. Again, back to that clarity of where does your stuff start and our stuff end. And go for character and not just a pretty face, right? So the last bit I want to leave you with is the good news is that if you are working with any sort of technology provider, a lot of them actually bake, I'm going to call it VCIO-ish type of services into their managed service agreements. But I think the reason that you need to have good understanding of the differences is because VCIO is like the sticker that everyone slaps on their proposals these days. You get any kind of proposal from a managed service provider, it's going to say, we do VCIO services. And I think it's important to peel that sticker back and understand what does that mean, and actually ask them, so what does that mean? What are you actually delivering as part of that? I can tell you for our sake, we do some of this, but it doesn't come at all of our service levels. If you're in a technology as a service agreement, we do this for you. But there needs to be an understanding that this is definitely not to the depth of what we're talking about here, right? So just understanding that you can get away if you aren't in full need of a full VCIO, you can get help with some of these things via a good, mature managed service provider, technology provider. So make sure you have business reviews and actually spend some time on your end preparing for those business reviews and bringing stuff to them. Make sure you're really utilizing their expertise on the budgeting and planning, because we really, most people we work with don't do that to the degree they could. You know, the IT consulting piece of the knowledge they have in the industry, right? And the knowledge they have about your business operation. Access to subject matters. We love doing training, presentations, all that kind of stuff, and utilize some of that kind of stuff. And then the last bit I'm going to leave you with is if you want to get the best bang out of your buck, best bang for your buck when it comes to any kind of outsourced relationship, whether it's full-time VCIO or this is more geared towards like VCIO-ish services, I would say, is actually put the time and effort in to really kind of get clarity around what you have available to you and in what capacity, and then ask for those services, right? Be transparent in sharing some of the organizational goals so that the advisor that you are hiring can actually advise you, because it's very difficult to give any kind of advice when I'm not understanding where you're trying to go. So a little bit of transparency goes a long way, and frankly, sharing financial expectations is the best way to take any kind of BS out of the sales process. I'm just going to be frank and honest here. If you are transparent about what the financial expectations are around the services you're trying to hire, it allows whoever you're trying to work with much better to align themselves to it, or to just say, hey, we're not in alignment. You probably need to look for someone else. Yeah, and then ask for help, right? Use their training resources and all of that kind of stuff. And all of that just to kind of say that, again, the reason this matters to me is because best case scenario, you're thinking you're getting something and it's just lip service. Worst case scenario, your expectation and whoever you hired to deliver this are completely out of alignment, and unexpressed expectations are premeditated resentment. And it will go badly for both parties. So I'm going to leave you with that. And I don't know if we have time for questions. At 12. What time do I need to be done? 2:10. All right, so I went 2 minutes over. I will be here the rest of the afternoon. And here again is my contact information. And yeah, please hit me up, and would love to talk more if you're interested. Thank you. All right, very good.